my family and my wife and everything thus far have sacrificed for me to achieve and get to where I am now. The birth of our first child, we didn't know at the time, but at 8 months old, she got a diagnosis of Angelman syndrome. Yeah, it's a very rare genetic disorder, but quite a severe disability.
Yes.
Angelman syndrome's 1 in 15,000, so it's
Wow.
quite rare. My wife made that sacrifice very early in our partnership and journey to close the business and become the full-time carer. It was definitely a grounding moment to see what are the priorities in life.
My guest this week was James Kostarakis, who is Managing Director of Fastrac Foodservice, a second-generation, family-owned and operated food wholesaler to the hospitality sector. We explored James's meaning of success in business and in family life, and how he negotiates the two. We also discussed the parallels between James's transition into the business from his father, and now his planning of his own transition out of his lead role at Fastrac. I was very interested to hear about his succession planning in family business and where the next generation is actually not family. This episode is one not to miss. Enjoy. Yeah, so James, thanks for joining us today. Again, we're in, what are we now? Lockdown 6. So slightly challenging, but given the new normal, just a new normal, right? But just given the format, I can continue to do this, which is great news. So I wanted to just firstly start with just generally, how are you going? How's life at the moment with everything that's going on?
Yeah, it's funny. I was talking about this yesterday that I suppose us Victorians are a bit more used to what's happening and how it's changing in other states. So I've got a very optimistic outlook at the moment. We've sort of got a new normal, and there's a bit of light at the end of the tunnel with the vision changing. I look at the simple things as well. The family's healthy, I'm healthy, staff around me are happy. So, it's onwards and upwards, even though we're in a channel that's harshly affected. I suppose they all are, but being a supplier to the restaurant industry, they're the first to be shut down and the last to open. So,
yeah, I was going to ask you about the business and what it does, because obviously, from my understanding of what you do, the current environment I would imagine on the surface would not be conducive to thriving. So could you tell us a little bit about what you do and how that's been impacted by what's happening at the moment?
Sure. So Fastrac Foodservice, we're a food wholesale distributor to the hospitality sector. So it's kind of almost like a hidden channel in terms of that, you often be sitting at your cafe or a pub and you don't think about where the food source comes from, or maybe some food channels have spoke about the chef going down to the local market and sourcing things. Well, the truth of it is that there's quite a large industry behind that supply chain through to the restaurant sector. So that's our business in wholesale distribution. Now that also includes customer types like hospitals, aged cares, anywhere a commercial kitchen is.
So why does that exist? Why do restaurateurs not, as an example, have a situation where they go down to the local Costco or Aldi and buy up large and then just do that? Why does this sort of service exist, and what are the benefits?
Yeah, sure. I suppose that still exists. The customer still can go to Aldi's and Woolworths and etc. is more convenient. However, the range is very different. So although they might be a popular known brands, they're just in a very different scale. So you walk into a retail supermarket and buy a 500 gram packet of pasta. Ours are a 15 kilo carton, and there's sites ordering multiples of those at a time. So it's the number of meals that are consumed and prepared within the kitchens that we provide that the retail is very different. So and a different quality too. There is absolutely a different spec to what goes into restaurant to what goes into retail.
I imagine these multinational type companies aren't actually catering for these larger quantities to to restaurants, or are they also competing with you guys?
Yeah, no, they're not competing, but they are supplying. So the same brands that you find in the supermarket, they produce for food service. But another aspect, apart from supporting those the large corporate brands, you do need to, because they're familiar and known. But we also like to purchase local and sustainable, so particularly with proteins, beef, etc. We've got the Gippsland right at our footstep. It's a perfect avenue to get quality products. And there's lots of local small producers across the peninsula, Yarra Valley, lots throughout Victoria. I mean, Gippsland is a food bowl, so of a lot of Australia. So you know, we benefit from those smaller unknown brands that you don't find on a retail shelf that also have a higher quality and a design for restaurants. And
so you work with your brother, and it's a second generation business?
It is, yeah. So 30 years old later this year. Dad started it in 1991, and my brother and I have been involved for around 20 years. We actually didn't think we'd join the family business. I started first in the need of a job, and I was a bike ride away from the factory. And, you know, I sort of started in the warehouse, taking the deliveries, picking the orders, etc. And then a position came up in sales after about 2 years. It was a maternity leave position, so it was only temporary. I'll give it a go. Absolutely loved that. That was when I really sort of got exposed to more about what we do and who we're supplying to. I sort of remember going around some of the wineries here on the peninsula and taking orders. You know, my product knowledge was quite low at that point in time. I literally had to hand over the notepad to the chef and say, "You're speaking another language to me. Can you write this down, or the order might get wrong?" But really worked in my favour. I learned so much. You know, even from myself, I developed from, you know, burning 2-minute noodles to now it's a passion of mine. I love cooking and experimenting and trying new products, and it really kicked me off on a bit of a journey. There was to test and play with and source better products for our customer type that they were after. So it was a little bit shortly after that my brother joined the business. And
so he's younger, your brother?
No, he's older.
Okay.
So we're 18 months apart.
Mm-hmm.
He was working for Australian Air Express, heading off in another channel. But I think it was at that point, after a couple of years of me being there, that Dad sort of saw it as a family business or a potential family business. So unbeknownst to myself then, I was still just thankful I got a job at the moment, and I was enjoying it and was close to home. So it took a bit of negotiating for my brother to join, because he had to take a pay cut to join what he was doing, to come and join the family business.
Yep.
And you know, he and I, we work really well together, and it's because as siblings we're just so very different. We didn't compete in the same things. We're just so very different in our likes and dislikes, and it just works so well when we're working together. It complements each other in different strengths. So
how do you work around, you know, the idea of like meritocracy and just, you know, this sort of idea of, you know, do you guys work on the basis that you know, the roles and the functions that you guys do individually, there's different weightings to those things? Or do you kind of say that you're on equal footing regardless of what it is that you do for the business? How does it work? Is it based upon personal exertion, or is it based upon talent? How do you divide labor and importance of each individual's role? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. No, and we've always done this within across our staff, is where people's strengths are. There's no point trying to push or force somebody into something that they're not comfortable with. Now, I mean, my brother and I, through the development process, where we've done every function within the business, but we've sort of landed where our strengths are.
Yeah.
And they're non-conflicting. They're very supportive of each other in terms of. So my brother's the finance IT, and he's a hobbyist programmer.
Okay.
And myself as managing director, CEO. And I sort of really came through the sales avenue, so it kind of fitted with the face or the front of the business, given that all of the customers knew me. They hadn't really met Nick, apart from the odd occasional social event he'd come to, or everybody knew of him and knew the family structure and business. But that was sort of where the avenue sort of landed us to where we are. And I'm a very outwards and driven, ambitious style person, and my brother's a little bit more, no, let's work on the numbers. So it actually works well together, that we're not driving off on a tangent and taking off this business at a pace that it can't sustain. We sort of normalize each other to say, hey, slow down, let's
it's
put
interesting.
this into place before that. So and we've got a lot of respect for each other. So
that's great. I mean, it's super interesting. Like, I resonate with what you're saying, because I have a similar thing that occurs between James and I in our business. The tension that exists between the push and the pull, me being the push and James being a little bit more of the pull, is I think a very super important part of having longevity in the business. Because if I implemented on every idea that I'd ever come up with, I think to be fair, we may have been in trouble. So I really resonate with this idea as well, that you guys have completely different skill sets, but it sounds like, correct me if I'm wrong, that you are very much aligned on from a values point of view, though, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Yeah. Could you kind of talk to that?
Absolutely. It's a very key, because I suppose that's where, when we started the leadership journey, that was where we started. You've got to start with your foundations, understanding your family governance and your business governance, and that all comes through with core values, culture, and etc. So Dad spent a lot of time on that with us, because you've got to get that right before anything, and that's just what made the rest of it fall into line and easy. If we've got the both common goal, the linear line that we're both following, then with that journey we're complementing each other. So if we had different visions or different directions for the business, I could see how that'd be a conflict for sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about how you handled the business being handed over to you by your father? It sounds like you weren't given a free kick, and it sounds like there were some compromises and sacrifices that you both had to make to actually take over the business and run it. Could you talk us through how you think what happened and how you think it was handled?
Yeah, sure. The succession journey, it really starts with a decision that's the exit strategy of the current owner. It was probably a decision he'd made before we knew about that, without a doubt. So Dad had been working on that project softly in the background before we'd really landed to a point where we made a decision. Dad had said, I'm going to retire, and it's going to be in the next decade.
How old was he, by the way? How old was he?
He'd be late 60s now, 67.
And when he was when he was going through that process, how old was he?
Yeah, late 50s.
Late 50s. Okay.
Yep. And we were early 30s.
Yep.
So with that, the next starting point is that development process. We'd achieved quite a fair bit and maintained and achieved most functions within the business. So our experience was thorough. But then it came to leadership experience is very different. And I suppose the hardest part that Dad had to go through was deciding who's going to be the next chief, because that's from a parent. So you put the family feeling into that. You've got two siblings that you've got to make a choice on. So our next step, once that decision had been made, was to get facilitators in. So our first contact. Yep.
I'm interested in that decision though, because you've got yourself and your brother sitting there. I'm not sure whether you guys have thought overly as to which one will be appointed the chief or not. And did your brother harbor any wants to sort of go down that path? Was there any problems in your dad selecting one over the other? Was it was there communication, or was it just being you handed the bat and that's it? Like, how did it work?
No, yeah, that's absolutely key. Was you had the word there, communication.
Yeah.
And it's the reach out to the facilitators that assisted that. They're fantastic, because if you've got a third party to hold to account, to assess us independently, that assists all the way through. So we went through a family business diagnostic. So that reviews the business health, that reviews our individual health and our leadership styles and skills. And through that process and journey is where you get to decide, where does the skill set, where do the strengths land? Because ultimately, really, in the ultimate structure, we're at the end both shareholders equally. So the ultimate call comes down to us, but on the day-to-day management, where are our strengths that are for the betterment of the business? That
sounds like an ideal scenario, because in many instances, I imagine, and from my experience, what I've seen is that people don't go through the succession process because they are worried about these types of decision and how it affects family dynamics. So bury our head in the sand, and we don't actually go anywhere with it. It's one of many reasons why people don't actually get through a succession a plan, or even consider it.
And look, it wasn't easy either. I mean, this is probably the first point in our life where we've actually ever been competitive in some sense. We didn't start the journey knowing who's going to land in the actual leadership chair for the management day-to-day of the business. So when we started the journey, and it took about four years really in the end, with one hard year at it of training, etc. So it was the first point in our actual sibling and family life that we'd had something where we're competing for. We're completely different. Growing up, Nick would stay inside playing the computer games and etc., and I'd be outside running and kicking the footy with mates. So and for Dad to make that decision, it's probably key that he brought facilitators in to assist that. And
why do you think your dad actually decided that he wanted to actually get out, and what were the reasons, do you think, for him?
I still don't completely know that. In terms that a key part of the journey is for the current owner to find their go-to. They've got to have a retirement plan. It's probably throughout the process with the facilitators, the only real hurdle that they ended up facing was what's Dad's go-to, because if they don't solve that, then he's going to keep coming back into routine, meddling a little bit, and doing this. But I think he just saw that we were probably at the right age, acumen, experience, that he saw a natural time for the leadership to hand over. And
you said he nailed as well. He's nailing something on his personal side. What do you think he was doing from, nailing a future without the business? Were his retirement plans in order? And, had he, thought about what sort of contribution he would make, to society, to the family outside of the business, do you think?
Yeah, I think you hit the point right there, is the family. I think right now, and this is in hindsight, and it's probably one of the bits we didn't talk about right at the start, but right now he's coupled to my children, and loves it. That's his full-time devotion. But at the point in time when we're going through this process, kids weren't on my table. It was maybe a thought of it's come through now, but maybe that was within his vision and within his scope. He did pick up the generic and thought, I'll start playing golf. He lived on a golf course, but didn't own a set of golf clubs until the day he retired. That was in terms of that was his challenge. We didn't see that as our challenge, apart from could it be a future hurdle where he keeps coming back into the business and wanting to run it, although and not permitting us to. But he made that clear cut and clear line quite early. Started to semi-retire a day a week while we're going through the leadership transition. So just did it in steps that enabled us to, make some mistakes as well and do things that we wanted to do, and go about how we would run the business still with a bit of guiding.
So it sounds like your father was instrumental. Obviously, I mean, I think the leader and the owner needs to be instrumental in really making the succession plan work. But it sounds like the positives were that he was very clear on what he wanted to do post exit. He had his ducks in a row. He actually decided that it would be important to get a facilitator and mentor or professional support to actually run through the process. He had willing and able children that would be able to take over, mature enough, all of that sort of stuff. So those are the kind of I suppose the pros. Were there anything in hindsight that you think could have been handled better if possible? Or, I mean, there's no regrets, I'm sure, but yeah.
Yeah, no. That's a very tough question. I actually don't think so. It was a funny dynamic that we went through, and maybe I could use one of the feedback from one of the facilitators. One of the facilitators just walked away. Now, that sounds a bit alarming, but he just says, well, my job's done here, and it was done within the first 12 months. He goes, usually I'm an umpire and I'm putting out fires and working out who's going to do this and who's doing that, and conflict resolution and working. And he goes, you guys aren't giving me any work. You're adopting everything we do. Your dad was the champion of the process because we were quite busy with the day-to-day in the leadership transition. So having a champion of the process internally to drive all of that. And, some key things that we adopted through the process, and we still do today, is having an annual retreat and having it across a couple of days where we spend a day on the family and then a day on the business, and segregate the two. Usually with the day of the business, we might invite our senior management team as well to do it around budget time to present budget and strategy. But ensuring that we've spent that day on the family, and we set that structure up knowing that there'll be future generations coming in, wives, etc., that are part of it, even if they're not ownership, they're part of the life.
I think most people would kind of understand what the business side of the strategic days would be entailing in general terms.
Yeah.
But the family side is super intriguing to me because I think it is something that is missed.
Mm-hmm.
And what is it? What is the structure? What does it look like if you were to do a day on family?
Mm-hmm. Yep, sure. It would be about putting it all on the table. It's an open book. If there are grimes or disputes, this is the time to air it. Thankfully, and similar to you asking were there challenges and how would we do it better, there wasn't much we would talk about in conflicts, or because it was uncomplicated. There are so many family businesses that are more complicated, particularly when you get other cousins or wives and multiple generations involved. We were quite less complicated,
but I imagine
on that same path.
But I imagine the complexity diminishes as well because the communication is high, and you do these things because complexity can occur and conflict can occur even in very simple, small families or families with less,
definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
So we'd still stay on those topics, absolutely, but they would be quite minor in terms of impact to the family or impact to the business. So we'd sort of focus on estate planning structures, future structures and what that thought looks like. We would often pull out a page of the Constitution and try to tackle that and work on development. Then we'd write a little bit in that afternoon about what does the family want with the business before management come along the following day and talk about what the management want from a strategy perspective. But keeping that function alive is absolute paramount. I suppose the other very key factor, and we still do it today, and this is probably one thing in hindsight, if anything, that would have loved to have adopted earlier and just didn't realise until we made the decision, which is drawing a line between what's the dining room and what's the boardroom and what conversations are had at each. And it wasn't until we really spoke to that and focused on that we really realised how much we're talking about work at a family barbecue. It was just not kosher. That's not the rest of the family's bored. They're in other parts of their life and other things, and we're just there talking shop. Well,
is it at all alarming to you at times, when you develop relationships with your family, or and they start to move into an area where the only connection that you really have is a conversation about work? Is that the alarming part of it?
That's what in hindsight we realised. We didn't realise that it was an issue, and absolutely it was, and it's so much for the betterment. I mean, all of a sudden, family barbecues were way more about everybody, where we were just bringing yesterday's, office grime to the Saturday barbecue. Not fun. And then we never really had a lot of the bringing the Saturday barbecue into the Monday work office, but you still got to make sure that the business side of the family business, that we've got that respect for each other in front of all of our staff, because that's a key part of leading the business.
Tell us a little bit about the gaps that you feel like you had when you were effectively appointed as leader, and how did you bridge the gaps?
Sure. Well, through training courses. So one of the networks the first call we made was to Family Business Australia.
Yep.
So through that journey, we both went through a couple of their courses, the director's course, the essentials course, etc. From there, also joined industry courses and a mentor thing through the Foodservice Association. And then later, when I was firmly in the chair, there's another association called the Executive Connection, as CEOs together to problem solve, troubleshoot. So really started to build those networks to embed that, and then those training, particularly the director's course and some finance course, and later now also doing the Australian Institute of Directors courses. Absolute key to development. So that's what it is.
Yep. Now I'm aware of now I know that Fastrac Foodservice is your business, and you're part of a collective group of similar food businesses. And that collective is called Countrywide, and I believe there's 108 members. And I just wanted to understand a little bit about that first, and maybe I just wanted to also understand, given that you're in a leadership position within that collective as well, why it's so important in your mind that the agenda for the group should be about a large part of that agenda should be about succession.
Yeah, sure. First, I'll tell you a little bit about Countrywide.
Yeah.
It's a very similar age to Fastrac, so coming up 30 years. At that stage, it was a state-based organisation. I think in the early 2000s, it amalgamated to a national footprint. So what we are is all independent food service distributors. As a collective, we put our buying power together to be able to compete with the nationals and the multinationals. And collectively, we actually hold the largest market share. So, I think we've got, out of the 102 members, we've got close to 160 depots. So we've got 100% coverage of Australia, over 1,500 trucks out there on a daily basis, about 90,000 restaurants that we service. And I think it's a very estimated about north of $3 billion turnover is our collective, our share of the industry. The coming up through my journey with Countrywide, I loved being part of a network of similar businesses. We would hold several conferences a year, and the problem solving and troubleshooting that you just have with other business owners over a beer at the end of the conference in the afternoon was just the best. You know, where there's 19 of us in Victoria.
So it's a collegiate atmosphere. It's not
we're competitors.
You're competitors, but it's also collegiate.
Oh, that's what I mean. This is what's amazing. We've got the best respect and support for each other. Yet, you know, we're also competitors at the end of the day. It's a funny dynamic because we've got trucks trying to go to the same cafe and restaurant.
But the importance of this, just so that the people, you know, our listeners can actually understand, it is the setup of this is to give you market buying power and competitive pricing when it comes to the delivery by actually, you know, having this kind of connectedness. Is that
absolutely?
So you're competing with you're competing against multinationals then with this sort of collective.
So very much so that the journey has always been, you know, if it's a Countrywide customer, it's already a Countrywide customer. So we do have mutual respect, a lot of that out there, but it does get a challenge to try and manage that. The more reps that you've got, that might not be a sales rep's first question. Are you a Countrywide customer? They just say, do you want to be a Fastrac customer or the like? So, but you know, the network part of Countrywide has just been the best for developing and problem solving. And you do that in your business, I'm going to try to do, you know, I'm going to try something similar. So that is what has built and developed and worked on us as a network, just to build us so strong. It also gives us that ability from a national office point of view to go for national contracts. So we hold several, so some like Spotless Catering and Subway, Guzman y Gomez, so quite a few popular chains that everybody's familiar with, where as an independent and not being a part of that network, we'd never have the ability to go and service and do that sort of work. So,
So why is it so important that succession is on the agenda for the members of that collaborative?
I suppose, like, it's probably similar in many businesses, is that many of the next generation have seen mum and dad grow up with the business, probably start working 7 days a week and ridiculous hours. At some point in their life, they might have decided, well, that's not for me. We're in a very similar sort of a position where we've got a lot of our network are senior business owners. Many are bringing the next generation through, but there are also a large proportion that we don't know what their next journey is and what their next plan is. So that, from a Countrywide perspective and a market share perspective, is a risk and a threat. They could sell to a national or multinational. Who knows? And that's why we're putting it on Countrywide's agenda, to really build the next generation network and build some resources and tools for these guys to start that process.
Mm-hmm. Tell me, and this is quite an exciting part of a part of I think the episode really, and your journey. What are your plans for succession now going forward? You're a young man, got a young family. This
might come as quite a shock to many people. I'm 38 and I'm starting to plan my exit strategy from the day-to-day management at Fastrac Foodservice. You know, I've set a goal within 2 years. I want to step out of the chair as managing director, CEO, into probably just a director's role, and I actually want to move interstate with the family.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, do you no, you know what I love about it? This is what I love about it. Yeah. I mean, often these plans sit in our minds and they're not vocalized for fear of not being able to do it for whatever particular reason. But the reality of it is you've got the courage to be able to announce it And that is a very, I think, important step in being able to actually see that vision through. So it's super interesting, I think. And it's also important to note that, succession planning and exit planning can happen at any age. It doesn't have to be defined by age. Have you set about planning what you'll do when you leave? Are you worried about the sense of worth and contribution being tied to your business?
Yeah, so I mean, that's why it was probably a year ago really made the decision, but the goal is still now 2 years away. And the leadership transition has begun. So most of my day-to-day has been handed over to a general manager.
Yep.
The business for many years has been worked on to be in that position of sale ready. So it doesn't need our contribution. It needs our guidance and governance and continuity of culture. If you try to, you've got to try to separate the business from yourself. It's its own person, it's its own entity. So you need to make it itself and become its own person and go about business. So the next stages is ensuring that, well, that leadership style and wants and culture that we've embedded for 30 years continues through. So that can still be done in my vision from a director's point of view and a board position. Absolutely, the culture starts at the top. So,
what sort of support mechanisms do you have around you and facilitators, and what gaps are there at the moment in terms of
Sure. The gaps are probably similar to what we had when we were going through our journey. So we're almost pulling out that handbook, although the handover of the next leadership is not to family. But we're still working on what are the gaps with our general manager, what areas of training and support. We're using this time our accounting firm, who also have advisors within there, to facilitate some processes. So we're really formalising and structuring our strategic processes internally at the moment for buy-in down the line. So we've engaged a third party, being our accounting firm, to facilitate that process over the next 12 months. Are
you suggesting that you are, because sometimes in family business, because of the trust factor between family, that some processes, tasks, systems are kind of not professionalized as much? And are you saying there's a process at the moment of professionalizing and being clear around certain systems and processes that maybe you have between your ears, but maybe not quite documented? Is that the sort of stuff we're talking about?
No, we've got quite formal documented processes. This is probably more on the development and building the input from management. So,
gotcha.
and then having the training and support of the directors to let that flourish. You know, for decades, it's been our strategy, it's been our direction, it's been our journey, and we implement that through to management. We're trying to flip that to enable our top senior management to be having that outward looking vision, and be able to implement that back into the daily. So they're not relying on directors to just feed that next strategy and the next goals. It'll always be approved by directors. However, if you don't have the add-in support value and then the support of that process through and delivering, you're basically just stepping away and letting the business continue to run. You want it to continue to be its own person, to grow, go forward. So that's probably more what we're trying to formalise.
How concerned are you about the business having continuity post your exit? I mean, how is that the main thing that sort of forces you to makes you kind of feel a bit jittery at night?
Yeah, that's one part of it, and the other part of it is probably more personally. I'll be on the cusp of 40. should be the start of my career here. But you know, I really want to put the focus back onto my family. And you know, I'm quite fortunate I'm in that position that I can make that decision and let go of the business in a sense of day to day, because all of a sudden it's not about what I want for the business, it's about what I want for the family. The business will be able to still fortunately provide for what I want with the family.
Yeah. So are there concerns on that front, you know, about personal income and financial, the ability to make it work financially outside of that? Are there, you know, is that something that you're pretty focused on?
It's not my key focus.
Okay.
I'll be honest.
Yeah.
Because it shouldn't be the driver. When you make the decision to step away and focus on the family, sure, I'll be holding it to account from a director's point of view, absolutely, and shareholders' point of view. But it's not the be all and end all. I've always been driven and sense of achievement, and I just want to put that next chapter onto the family. I've only got the next 10 years with my girls before they say, "Go away, Dad." Yeah, you know, they won't want me around. And if I miss that window because I'm so focused on how the business can perform so well for me, and I miss that yes, the family's happy and we're financially stable, and that'll still happen because I'll govern that separately. But if I'm so focused on that, I'll completely miss this window with the family. So I
love the fact that it's one of the proudest moments that I called this podcast "It's Never About Money," because that was my guess at the start. But then every time I talk to people, you know, it kind of came to the conclusion, like, of course, money's important. Well, not, you know, it's kind of a cheeky name, right? But people who are successful often see these things not as binary, as very, you know, multifaceted, and you know, you're explaining that nicely. Do you think your age has and having a big family has made it an easier or a harder decision? Do you think?
Both, but for different reasons.
I know.
You know, it's so opportunistic to do it at 40, and wow, I get to now. I don't see sunshine. I'm in my office while it's dark, and I'll leave when it's dark. Now I get to see sunshine and enjoy the small things. I take my girls to school. So you know, a big driver for it as well is that, you know, my family and my wife and everything thus far have sacrificed for me to achieve and get to where I am now.
How pivotal has your wife been in really supporting you and the family, you know, to run your business and do everything you need to do? Couldn't do it. What's her name? Nicole. Yeah. So Nicole's been an absolute, you know, paramount in this whole.
So she's my strength. Absolutely. So supportive. We're very supportive of each other as well. We work in a similar sort of a unique relationship that, you know, we recognize each other so well. When one's down, the other one steps up to the job. You know, we've had some challenges with family. My wife entrepreneurial as well. When we met, she had her own business in fashion and homewares store. But then the birth of our first child, we didn't know at the time, but at 8 months old, she got a diagnosis of Angelman syndrome.
What was that? Sorry, say that again.
Angelman syndrome.
Don't know that.
Yeah, it's a very rare genetic disorder, but quite a severe disability. So, I mean, a lot of people know autism. Yes. Autism is about 1 in 50 people as an average.
Yes.
Angelman syndrome is 1 in 15,000. So it's quite rare. Similar aspects to the autism spectrum, but other severities, like she can't talk. She won't ever. I think the highest known statistics about 30 words ever required. She's 5 years old now.
Yes.
Where she's still yet to walk, learning to walk. So my wife made that sacrifice very early in our partnership and journey to close the business and become the full-time carer.
I'm really, I feel that, and I might be wrong here, but I feel like these types of situations for families when it comes to health and these specific, illnesses with children or parents or deaths in the family can often make you really think about what's the importance of, pedaling the wheel at the end of the day when people need you and they need your support, and family is ultimately important. Talk to me about how this has informed your decision now. I mean, it is unusual. I'm 40 now. I do have a succession plan myself, but I don't have any kids, and but how have having the kids and specifically that challenge for you? How has that kind of informed these decisions?
Oh, it's the driving force to set the business up successfully and enable the right timing that I can passionately then devote to the family. And I really want to. Can't rush it because it's got to be, the business has got to be stable. When it came to that decision, it could have very well been me saying, I'll step away from the family business. Nicole, you keep running your shop and store, and I'll stay home, still be a shareholder at Fastrac. But we spoke about it and decided on this journey. We didn't decide that the journey would be, let's set it up in the next 7 years back then to step away and move interstate and grow the family to three children. But it was definitely a grounding moment to see what are the priorities in life. And that's where, it gave my devotion to Fastrac. And at that same time was when I was first going for election onto the countrywide board. I'm thankful I didn't get it back in 2016 because it was just prior to the diagnosis of our daughter, and we spent months in hospital when she was first born. She wasn't feeding, etc. So I would have had to resign from that position immediately anyhow. I wouldn't have been able to give it anything, but I kept it in the back of my mind that was definitely an enabler to the next chapter of our family life. If I could get on to being a part of the larger industry, being able to, sounds funny in hitting your 40s and starting to try to give back, but a little bit of that. And if I can add some value to our network and still be a shareholder and run the business, but remotely.
I think you can give. I can think you can give back before you've got completely. I think altruism is available to all of us, I suppose.
Yeah.
I wonder, like, if you cast your mind going, thinking about the future and thinking about you actually going through the succession process. What do you want your kids to notice in terms of change about you?
Absolute key is being present. That is. When you're chasing ambition and trying to fulfill aspiration within your business, and anybody that's a company owner, it's all consuming. We often, being a family business, talk about all of our staff being our family as well. You do take on a lot when you're in that position of responsibility. So that's where the sacrifices I've made to date have been, unfortunately with the family, not always being present. I'm there, but my mind might be about, what's happening at work, particularly the last 2 years going through, what the world has gone through, navigating that while trying to remain, calm as a leader in the business, try to not bring it home. That's my my hardest job right now is getting that balance right. And that's probably the catalyst to why we made a big call to say, let's move interstate, because it needs a shock, it needs a separation. So long as the business is set up, it needs that shock and separation to ensure that I'm there and I'm present. And I think it will be, because every time up until the world was in this position, every time I was on a holiday, I would always rejuvenate, but I'd always just be so present with the family. And that's what I want to be able to get to.
So if you could kind of summarize for us, in terms of looking at, you're finished in terms of the personal exertion side within your business, the succession has worked. How do you define success then going forward?
The family.
Yeah.
The health, the happiness, the unity, that, and legacy. If there could be some legacies left with work, and if I could still see them when I'm flying back and having board meetings, monthly management meetings.
What's legacy mean? What's legacy mean to you?
Well, the culture, continuity of the culture is paramount. It's what has kept a lot of longevity within our staff. We've got a lot of staff in the bracket of 20 years, 15 years, 10 years. Handing that leadership over to the next generation that's not family connected adds that element of risk in. Got all confidence with the process we're going through and the people we've selected. It's just that risk. So if you can see that understanding, that continuity is so ingrained that it remains, that's fantastic. And it's part of why I'm really focusing on this and excited that when I joined the board at Countrywide, it was on the 5-year agenda. Now, it was 2 years away until it, and I just put my hand up months ago. I said, I just want to take this project on myself. Does the board approve that I'll champion this and kick it off now? Because our industry is in that sort of a period where we're going to have a lot of consolidation, a lot of exits and strategies needing to be discussed. So if I could start to, see those successes from anything I can support and give back, that would be humbling on the business side of it. So,
well, James, to be honest, I feel that it's a real privilege to have had you on today, because really it's, your story is the embodiment about what this podcast was set up about. Really, it's about looking at many different facets of what makes a business owner tick and successful. And a large part of it for you is family, which I strongly resonate with. And it's really interesting that I've never really had anyone that has kind of seen the succession process go through with their, passing on from your father, but then also at such an early stage, actually looking to go through a similar process yourself, but also advocating it for the collaborative Countrywide group as well. Talk is cheap, but action is important, and I think that's what you're demonstrating. So really appreciate you having you on. But I just wanted to also ask you a last question, which is a bit of a curly one, most challenging one I would have asked all day. What spirit animal would you be? I ask all my guests. This is not a surprise anymore. What sort of spirit animal would you be, and why would you be that spirit animal? Under pressure, right?
I just made a horse noise, so maybe a horse. Naturally, just.
What sort of a horse are we talking?
Well, if I can now try to relate that. Horses are social animals.
Yes.
I very much am. Horses, they both love to sprint, but they also like to pace themselves. I enjoy both elements. Being fast-paced industry we're in, but got to steady yourself. and I like winning. Horses love to win.
Yeah, well,
I love to win a race.
I like that, and also the way that you win is very nuanced. I like it. It's not just about the money. It's good.
Perfect. I love it.
Yeah, good on you. Thanks, James.
No, thanks, Joe. Appreciate it.
I hope that this one was enjoyable to listen to and there were some moments of value. If you have resonated in any way with the sentiments of this podcast, we would be delighted to direct you to our website, www.itsneveraboutmoney.com.au, for more free resources and education aimed at improving your capacity to make sound financial decisions for the benefit of your family. We wish you every success, however you define it.